Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and let's make a start. It's 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 9th of November. My name is Patrick Hall. I'm the Mayor of the City of Canning. On behalf of the Council, I'd like to welcome you to this meeting. I now declare the meeting open, and it's just after 6 o'clock. We made a slightly late start, 6:01. We start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of this land, and we pay our respects to elders, both past and present. Tonight's briefing is for the purpose of asking questions and seeking clarification on agenda items for the next ordinary council meeting. No decision making or entering into debate is to occur at this meeting. May I ask all present please to turn off electronic devices, especially mobile phones, iPads and tablets for the duration of the briefing. And tonight's agenda briefing is being recorded. A copy of the audio recording shall be available on the City's website within 72 hours of the conclusion of this meeting. Agenda briefings are public meetings, and any information you may provide may be also publicly accessible. This meeting is also being live streamed, the audio of which is being live streamed on the City's website. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their voice is being live streamed to the public. Disclosures of interest. The prescribed disclosure requirements apply to meetings that are convened under the provisions of the Local Government Act. However, it may be perceived as ethically unacceptable and at odds with the probity and accountability principles of the Act and codes of conduct for elected members to participate in forums, briefings or workshops where they are aware that they have a conflict of interest and do not declare it. In the interests of openness and accountability, elected members are encouraged to disclose a conflict of interest where they are aware that they have one when attending a forum, briefing or workshop, and where applicable, remove themselves from the room while the matter is being discussed. At item 2, attendance, the full council is in attendance. Thank you, councillors. No apologies. Item 2.2, prove leave of absence. There are none. Disclosures of interest. CEO Kane, I'll ask you to read the disclosures.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have 4 disclosures of interest, 2 which are shown tonight in the agenda. They relate to me in items CC05 5021 and CC05121, both of which are financial interests, and I will not be present in the chamber at that time. We have an interest from Councillor Bain in partiality in term CD03321, and we have a declaration of impartiality from Director Bowe for CC0501 21 and CC05121, which is impartiality in terms of the generation of the reports for the agenda.
We'll address those meetings, declarations again when those items are presented to council. Question time for the public. Response to previous questions taken on notice. Any responses to any previous questions taken on notice will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda, which will be published later this week. The question times for the public. The time set aside for public question time is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to items on tonight's agenda. For recording purposes, please state your name and address and then proceed to ask your questions. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with policy AD02, members of the public who have registered their interest to ask questions with the City's administration shall be called upon in the order in which registrations were received. Written questions will precede verbal question. I open question time now. The time by my recollection is 6:04 p.m. City has received a number of questions tonight. I'll invite those people to come forward. Marnie Aldridge, would you like to step forward, please?
Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors, Interim CEO Kane and directors and those in the public gallery. My name is Marnie Aldridge and I live at Minota Avenue in Shelley. My first question is, as there was never any allegations of money changing hands, why was the CCC investigation called in for the first place by the CEO and Mayor when there was no mention of any impropriety with money? Surely it was a minor breach.
Gosh, I wouldn't even know where to start to answer that one. I could, but it'll take a while. CEO, do you think you might be able to provide a brief? Can I just say that the passing of money or the question of money has no bearing. The Crime and Corruption Act is fairly easy, simple legislation to read. It actually sets out in there, and so does the Local Government Act, a whole raft of offences in relation to serious breaches. It actually tells you what a serious breach is.
But usually the CCC is involving when there's amounts over $50,000?
Why would you say that?
Because in the CCC, it's usually regarding money, and if there was no allegations of money being exchanged.
I believe that is completely incorrect. I'll ask the CCC sets its own threshold for what a serious breach might be or what corruption might be. I don't think it's determined by dollar sum. I've never heard that. I've been fairly closely associated at times with, with investigations, including this one. So that's news to me. I don't think that's correct information, Mrs. Aldridge, and I'd, perhaps just read through the legislation. And as I said, it is fairly easy to read. It's not bad. Director, can you cast any further light on that? Sorry, CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Crime and Corruption Act doesn't rely simply on reporting of fraud. It relies on reporting of suspected misconduct. Misconduct can come into various forms. Misconduct can exist in terms of the access to information that's presented to a body, staff member or a councillor. In terms of the specifics around what was reported to the CCC, it's a breach of that act or that legislation if anyone were to disclose what was reported or any aspects of it. So it simply doesn't have to relate to matters to do with fraud to be referred to the CCC.
Thank you, Mrs. Aldridge. Your next question.
Okay, so second question. So the request for the CCC investigation into this council over the CEO recruitment was made very public. And will the results for the investigation also be made public?
CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just reiterate my last answer. Any matter referred to the CCC has confidentiality on it and can't be disclosed either in terms of what was disclosed to CCC, what they discussed with any staff member or any other party, or what they have resolved.
Okay, so as the candidate never actually, well, with my understanding, never actually leaked who the councillor was and the confidential information, well, now it's come out that, has the results come out from the CCC investigation that there was something there?
I didn't quite understand that. Can I just get
So
you to repeat
was there
just the
actually
last...
final result about the CCC investigation into a council? Because there was quite huge allegations directed towards the council.
That, just in relation to the CCC Act itself, it's actually an offence under the Act with serious implications for any person to discuss publicly or share information in relation to an investigation by the CCC. That's just the rules. I'm sorry that doesn't, whet the appetite of people that know what's going on. We're holding tonight. We'll be discussing confidentially the matter, and the council obviously will be privy to certain information, but only because they were involved in the complaint, myself included, and it concerns this council. We are not allowed, as much as you might like us to do so, under the CCC Act, as I've said, it's actually a serious offence for any person to disclose any information in relation to that investigation. We just can't do it. Thank you. Mr. Aldridge.
Afternoon, Council. Richard Aldridge, 5 Minota Avenue in Shelley. I was skimming through the Local Government Act, as I do, and under 5.23 it states that meetings should be open to the public in general, but council, then it's the council can choose whether the meeting for sections are closed or not. And this includes matters affecting the employees. My question is, with CC 050-21, which employee is affected by that? Because there is no CEO, because the CEO selection process hasn't started, so who's the employee?
As CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the council has an acting CEO or an interim CEO, and I hold that position. Whilst this deals with the full-time recruitment, anyone who's directly involved in that process, and as I had previously been an applicant for the role, makes a declaration of interest, which I have in this case, and won't participate in giving any advice to council. So that matter can go behind closed doors if council so choose to discuss, because it deals with a confidential staff matter.
Thank you. Follow-up question? Your second question, Mr. Aldridge.
So if the council, given the fact that we've had a CCC investigation into the City of Canning and it caused the derailment of the CEO process, this council could actually vote to make it in open doors and it wouldn't be in breach of any legislation?
You're not telling this council anything it doesn't already know, Mr.
No, it was a question. That's why my voice raised at the
Well,
end.
the answer is yes.
So they can, thank you. There, on the warrant listings, Kyron got paid an expense. It seems like it was 3 months ago that he disappeared into the woodwork and he's still being paid back for an expense. How has that happened?
Look, I could probably... CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You would notice that all of these are lag payments. So with the report payments made in previous months, they exist in the register. CEO Chiron's payments were lodged at the conclusion of his term as CEO, as would normally expected, and it's taken a number of months for them to suddenly to be processed and go through. So they don't relate to anything that happened after the time of his employment.
Thank you very much.
Judy Potter.
Mine, I think, got a little confused. It wasn't so much questions tonight, it was just giving the community support regarding the CCTV that's coming up tonight.
Did you have any questions in relation to that item?
No,
No questions?
no.
Okay, all right, thank you
No.
very much. This is only for public question time, so
Yeah.
if you don't have any
We got
questions...
a little confused on whether it was questions or, because I asked to be able to speak tonight, but I think some of the website needs to be fixed yet.
No, that's fine, but if
So-
you've come down here to speak on an item, there's no reason I don't think why you couldn't do so.
Mr Mayor, no, we don't recall receiving a deputation request. I've approved all those that have come through and actioned them through the website. So Judy, happy to catch up with you afterwards, noting that the item will actually be up for discussion next week at the OCM. If you are seeking to make a deputation, there's still an opportunity to speak before council.
Just in relation to that, CEO, though, in relation to deputations, my understanding is that the deputations can be made... No, look, I'll have to have a look at it. Judy, you okay coming back next week and making a deputation? If that's what you wanted to do?
I did, and we had a conversation of, obviously it didn't come through, there's something wrong with the website.
Yeah, that's been taken care of, I understand. So I saw the email from earlier
so-
today. Yeah, we're still
Yes,
trying
I
to track
can
it down.
wait until next week.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Are there any further questions from the public gallery? Thanks, everyone. I'll close public question time. It's now 6:14 p.m. I'll move on to item 4.3, and that is deputations. A deputation has been approved tonight for Ms Sian Mawson regarding item NOM 010 of 21, the foregoing of grant allocations and removal of funding for Southern Link Road project in Canning City Centre. Sian, would you like to step... Oh, you already stepped forward. You know the drill by now, don't you? You've got up to 10 minutes to make your deputation. Welcome, and start.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Good evening. My name is Sian Mawson from 86 Gibbs Street, East Cannington. Tonight I want to talk about item NOM-10-21, foregoing of grant allocations and removal of funding for Southern Link Road project in Canning City Centre. Firstly, I apologise to those here tonight who have heard this deputation before, but I thought it important for our new councillors to hear it. Southern Link Road Stage 3 is proposed to join Gerard Street to Grey Street in Cannington. In doing so, some of the Cannington Claypan, a threatened ecological community, will be cleared. We hear the term threatened ecological community, or TEC, or TEC, a lot, but do we really know what it means? Let's start with the word community. In human terms, a community is all of the people that live in the same area as us and with whom we interact. We may see these people regularly, like our neighbours, workmates or shopkeepers, or less frequently, like the emergency services doctor or plumber. These people make up our community and help our personal world keep turning. An ecological community is a community that, instead of being made up of humans, includes all of the other life forms in an area. The Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions describes it thus. An ecological community is a naturally occurring group of plants, animals and other organisms interacting in a unique habitat. The complex range of interactions between the component species provides an important level of biological diversity in addition to genetics and species. So the plants, animals and other organisms, including fungi and bacteria, found in an area make up an ecological community. The differences between different ecological community types are influenced by a number of external forces. For example, wet areas will have a different community to dry areas because different plants and animals have evolved to tolerate different conditions. But the external force may be much more subtle than that and may be invisible, such as different soil types or where the depth of groundwater varies. Then we come to the word threatened. I know what it's like when I feel threatened, but what does it mean for an ecological community? In this context, the word threatened means that the ecological community is at risk of becoming totally destroyed. To complicate matters a bit further, there are different categories within the definition of the word threatened, depending on how close the ecological community is to becoming totally destroyed. The Cannington claypan is classified as containing several ecological community types, two of which are threatened ecological communities. One, based on soil type, is listed as being endangered, and the other, based on the vegetation, as being critically endangered. Okay, so what does endangered and critically endangered mean? As mentioned earlier, there are different categories within the definition of the word threatened, depending on how close the ecological community is to becoming totally destroyed. These are presumed totally destroyed, critically endangered, and vulnerable. As you can see, the ecological community that is the Cannington claypan being classified in part as critically endangered is only one step away from being totally destroyed. I won't read out the full definition of critically endangered, but the consistent theme through it all is that there's less than 10% of that type of ecological community left, and if things keep going the way they have been, it is expected that the ecological community will be totally destroyed in approximately 10 years. The classification of endangered is not much better. For this classification, there needs to be less than 30% of that type of ecological community remaining, and it is expected to become totally destroyed in 20 years. And the term destroyed has its own definition too. An ecological community doesn't need to be wiped from the earth to be considered totally destroyed. It just needs to be modified such that re-establishment of ecological processes, species composition and community structure within the range of variability exhibited by the original community is unlikely within the foreseeable future, even with positive human intervention. To help us understand what that means, let's look at a small country town. This town is its own community. We have some farmers, a petrol station, a school, grocery store, and the residents. A nice little human community. Now let's see what happens when Farmer Joe decides to sell up. Farmer Joe is lucky and is able to sell his property to his neighbour, Old MacDonald. Farmer Joe and his family then leave the district. But now, with fewer children in the area, the school has to close. That leads to other families leaving the town so that their kids are close to a school. With fewer customers, the grocery store closes. Although the town still exists, it is no longer able to support the needs of the community. And the same thing happens in an ecological community. The lives of all of the plants and animals are so intertwined that one small action can cause the whole community to collapse. To the casual observer, it will appear that everything is well. But those plants and animals that rely totally upon another species can be put in peril should something upset the balance. Now let's get back to the Cannington claypan. The local biodiversity strategy tells us that the ecological community that, in this city, is now found only at the Cannington claypan used to cover 305 hectares. In 2018, there were only 6.2 hectares left. That means that we have already lost more than 97% of this type of ecological community. The city contends that most of the land to be impacted by the road is classified as degraded or completely degraded. What isn't mentioned is that claypans and wetlands are some of the easiest ecological communities to recover. So what is presented as not worth saving because it is degraded is, in the eyes of an experienced land care worker, easily recoverable. Control the weeds and clay pans practically regenerate themselves. Another contention is that we should wait for the EPA decision, as they are best placed to determine the environmental impacts. And we should hear from the experts. And the EPA are experts in their field. It's just that their field of expertise is in applying the legislation. I would argue that the environmental experts are here in our environmental volunteers. Collectively, we have over 100 years of experience in caring for the land. We eat, breathe and sleep the rehabilitation and regeneration of degraded native vegetation. And we say that allowing this road to be built is environmental vandalism. There is a chance that the clay pan would gain, there is a chance that the city would gain management of the majority of the clay pan. That would be great, but it is not guaranteed. The only thing that is guaranteed is that to allow this road to be built would result in further damage to an environment that is already suffering. We know that it is classified as containing ecological communities that are endangered and critically endangered. From what we discussed earlier, critically endangered is just one step away from being totally destroyed. And we know that being totally destroyed relates to the function of the whole community, not just how much vegetation is left. Ecological communities have been destroyed since Europeans arrived in Australia. That previous destruction can be excused as it was done through ignorance. However, today we know exactly what we are doing and what we risk losing. Constructing the Southern Link Road will have a permanent impact on the clay pan. If it doesn't result in the ecological community being totally destroyed, it will at the very least push it that little bit closer to the edge. My hope is that the decision made next week will give real meaning to the words threatened ecological community. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for coming along. Nice to see a round of applause. Can I have Mr. Clayton Plug I have here? Mr. Plug? Thank you very much. You've been approved for a deputation in relation to CD 033 of 21. That's the application for development approval, additional place of worship and community purpose uses to existing educational establishment at 22 Dalton Place in Wilson. Clayton, again, thank you for coming along. Can you please introduce yourself to the council? You have up to 10 minutes to make your deputation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the summary there. Good evening, councillors. My name's Clayton Plug. I'm Senior Town Planner at Harley Dykstra, and I'm just here representing our client tonight, who runs the educational establishment at 22 Dalton Place in Wilson. And I'm here in support of the recommendation that you will be formally considering next week. And I just wanted to give a little bit of background. I will keep it brief. So, following the completion of a successful 12-month trial period, we are here to I guess, confirm that we accept your staff recommendation to grant permanent approval to this application, that we're comfortable with the conditions proposed within, I should say. In support of that request, I would also like to note the following points briefly. Firstly, the proposed use, in particular the place of worship element, has operated at the site well over the last 12 months in a manner that sought to respect the surrounding neighbours and to clearly demonstrate that they are community-minded and do care about those around them. And this has been evidenced by the fact that there have been no complaints that we're aware of registered with the city or with the landowner during the last 12 months, and I do trust that the councillors will interpret this fact positively as well. The landowner has required that the place of worship operators diligently comply with the conditions of the approval over the last 12 months, specifically the noise and operational management plans that have been prepared to the satisfaction of the city, and these seek to provide clear rules and guidelines on how to appropriately manage the uses occurring at the site. Next, I'd like to note that both the management plans have also been reviewed through the city's recent assessment of the application that's before you tonight and next week. We have tweaked a few items within them, even as recently as earlier this week, and that's just to ensure the best level of amenity control in the local neighbourhood and it also accords with our client's desire, the landowner's desire, to ensure that the use is managed in a way that keeps as many people happy as possible. 12 months ago, I stood before you indicating that we were supportive of the 12-month trial period, given it would also allow our operator a chance to determine whether the conditions of the approval and if the general operating model would indeed work for them. And whilst they haven't been able to fully implement the community purpose uses they would have liked, as for the reasons set out in the agenda report, they can confirm that they are accepting of the proposed conditions moving forward on a permanent basis. Councillors, I trust that this, along with the positive recommendation put to you by council staff, enables you to see a path forward to the approval of this development at next week's council meeting. We are thankful for the support of city staff and the councillors so far, and we look forward to that continuing should you see fit. If you do have any questions or wish for clarification on anything to do with this application, we'd be more than happy to make ourselves available to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Plug. At item 5, items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public gallery. We have a number of people here, obviously, for items on tonight's agenda, so I will call those forward. They will be, in this order, CD 033 of 21, addition of place of worship, etc., 22 Dalton Place, Wilson. Notice of motion 01021 Southern Link Road project. I'll call that forward, so you don't all have to sit in the audience all night waiting for us to get to it. And also notice of motion 011 of 21, review of policy CS 03, use of monitoring technology. I'll just bring those 3 items forward. At item 6, reports of committee meetings. There are none this evening. At item 7, reports. The first is from the Chief Executive Officer, CEO Kane. There are none under that portfolio. At item 7.2, I might just deal with. I will bring forward that first item, councillors. That will be CD 033 of 21, and that's the item we were just discussing. We just had a deputation on the addition of place of worship and community purpose uses, 22 Dalton Place in Wilson. We'll bring that matter forward. Councillor Bain, you've got a declaration of impartiality, I think. Would you like to read that to the...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an extended family member who attends the premises for education purposes only. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, the item is on the screen now, CD 033 of 21. Are there any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Bain, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A number of questions, if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
Have the contact details of the Facilities Liaison Officer been provided to all property owners, occupiers within 200 metres of the subject land?
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll have to take that particular question on notice. Get back to Council.
Thank you. Councillor Bain?
Is Council able to view the complaints register accumulated over the past 12 months and the steps taken by the applicant to address them?
Is Council able to view that register, Director Bright?
As mentioned in the report, there has been no complaints lodged with Council, and the applicant has also identified that no complaints have been received, so there is no complaints listed.
What will the City do with the complaints register submitted each year by the applicant?
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, we would obviously act on the complaint as it was live, and certainly most in the community would certainly come to the City if they have an ongoing issue. If it's just a localised one-off issue, hopefully the church will be able to deal with it then and there as it happens live, but anything that's more ongoing and persistent, we have our compliance officers and our environmental health officers that will attend and make sure that it complies with the conditions.
Councillor Bain?
Will the City continue to receive and respond to complaints made by residents?
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, yes, we certainly will.
In the noise management plan, one of the conditions is that the users of the multipurpose hall must only, users of the multipurpose hall must only use the sound equipment provided by the owner. So one of the objectors put forward that the original sound system for the gym is not being used as per this condition. Are we able to check this?
Director Bright?
Yes, we can certainly follow that up with the applicant and get back to council.
Thank you. Any other questions on that matter, councillors? Councillor Holland.
Yeah, I've got one, just want to follow up on that one. I've got a couple, but I want to follow up on that one. Was your question asking that, actually, can you repeat that last question about the sound system or whatever?
Councillor Bain.
So in the noise management plan, one of the conditions is that the users of the multipurpose hall must only use the sound equipment provided by the owner. One of the objectors put forward that the original sound system for the gym is not being used as per this condition. Are we able to check this?
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Councillor Holland.
Am I right in here in saying that they can use this for community purpose with people up to, 29 people, and there's no limit for the amount of occurrences that happens per year? They can have 10 a day for every day of the year?
Through Mr Mayor, no, the condition is quite clear in relation to how many events and how many people can attend each of those events. So if you look at condition 13, that identifies when the events can occur and how many people can attend each of those events. So as long as within that those parameters, they can undertake the activity in accordance with that condition.
It's exactly where I was looking. You look at 13A, it tends to tend to between 0 and 29, no limit. So exactly what I said, they could have 10 a day for every day of the year.
Yes, that's correct. Obviously, up to 29 persons, given that's quite a small volume of people. So that's the question. So yes, that is correct.
Just a question for myself. The trial here for the application was for 12 months and that's been completed, but the trial was in two parts. It was in relation to the use of the premises as a place of worship, and the second part of that was around the community purpose uses. And as the report stipulates, the second part of that, due to a range of reasons, are obviously acceptable in relation to COVID and disruption and maybe just some internal things with the school. But the second part of that, the community purposes use, my understanding is that there has been no community purposes use. Am I right?
Through Mr Mayor, yeah, that's my understanding, that due to COVID, there was no uptake of that community purpose aspect of the application.
So my only concern with that is since the community came to us and wanted this trial to occur so we could actually determine whether or not it was actually being properly adhered to, we've got a significant part of it just hasn't actually operated. So we haven't been able to determine or monitor that, and I'm wondering how that will be addressed, because if we actually approve the application as per the report, part of the trial wasn't carried out, so we've no idea how that's going to actually work. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, it's a fair comment. The issue that has since occurred since the 1st of July is that the regulations have now changed.
Okay.
And a change of use to a permitted use, which the community purpose is allowed to occur without approval actually occurring. The applicant has decided to lodge the application for permanency with that use and is prepared to comply with those conditions. But technically, given the state government has changed the regulations as of July, that aspect of the application no longer needs formal approval. So
we can't withhold.
So we can't withhold the approval for that part of the application anyway.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Mr Mayor, just with respect to some of the conditions under the operational management plan, issues raised by the community like use of play equipment and car parking adjacent to people's houses and so forth, and I guess accepting the cumulative effect. How does the city expect, will it be long-term people policing whether kids are using play equipment or parking on the western side? Will that become a normal thing down the track? Is it just up to the community to report if it's becoming a bit unbearable over a protracted period?
Director?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, certainly those particular landowners adjacent to the playground, adjacent to that car parking area, did raise those as issues, and obviously the applicant responded to the city's inquiries over how they could better manage the use of those two areas. That's a commitment that they've made in their operational management plan to not utilise those areas. you're right, we're not going to be there all the time, but if the neighbour did see that the playground, for example, was being utilised, we can certainly follow that up and our compliance officers can look into that.
Thank you. Any final questions before we move on, councillors? Thank you. We'll move on to Notice of Motion 01021. It's in relation to the Southern Link Road project. I'll just wait for the governors to bring that matter up on the screen. Thank you. Are there any further questions on that item tonight, councillors? No further questions. Councillor Bain?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Should SRL Stage 3 be approved, will Gerard Street remain one lane each way?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, I might ask, Mr Bosich is nodding, so I will confirm that it will be maintained one way, each way, one way.
Yes, it will. Any further questions on that matter? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next item then, which will be Notice of Motion 011 of 21, the review of Policy CS03, use of monitoring technology. Just before we get to that, only because we have obviously people in the audience who were interested in that last item, you're free to leave at any time. Please just jump up and leave if you'd like to. That matter will be actually up for a discussion and a debate by council and a decision at next Tuesday's meeting. So just so you know how it works, next Tuesday. Thank you very much. Right, Notice of Motion 011 of 21, review of policy CS03, etc. Any questions from the floor, councillors, on that one? Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, just one question. With the rates that we send out from the city annually, once a year to all the ratepayers, I believe that there is a security levy placed on those rates. I just want to clarify whether or not that just applies to residential properties, or does it apply also to commercial, retail, industrial, business premises as well?
Director Bowe or CEO?
My understanding is it applies to all properties, the security levy.
Just again, please, Mr Mayor. So just, I've got this clear. So places, businesses, for example, like Westfield, Stocklands, Riverton, Livingston, shopping centres, those owners that get those rates, they would be, on those rate notices, they would be inclined to pay for that security levy as well. Is that correct?
We collect the CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, they provide a contribution security levy. The quantum may vary, though, and in some cases it may be just a single security levy. If you wish to know, council, about any individual property, we can go and research that for you.
Anything further, Councillor Sweeney?
No, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on that item, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Holland?
Yeah, if this was successful, who would be determining where the CCTV cameras would be going, especially if it's going to be looking at private properties? Who determines that?
So this is only to consider bringing the matter back before councillors, not to make a decision on CCTV?
Ask more questions so I can get more general knowledge which goes into my decision-making
Director
process.
McQuaid.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you. Councillor Holland, the intent, irrespective of this policy, is to bring a CCTV network plan back before council in the new year. This policy does not then detail that the city will go and start applying CCTV anywhere. It's the fact that at the moment we are restricted in where and how we can place CCTV cameras, but a plan would come to council beyond the date, which is already something that's underway for us to look at delivering.
Councillor Holland?
That doesn't answer my question.
Which part
Who
of it
would
didn't
make the
answer your
decision on where this, when this, we know where this is going and it'll end up coming back, like you said, and then the decisions will be made on where CCTV cameras are placed. So who would make those decisions and why? Onto
Director.
what evidence?
Well, we would develop the CCTV network plan that would identify key locations across the city that would need to become, and then we would also develop management guidelines, which we already actually have currently in place, management practices that have been provided to all elected members that detail how and where we apply CCTV. If, due to the policy changing, we need to review that and update that, that is what we'll do. And that will have the principles for where CCTV principles get applied.
Any further questions on that item? Councillor Bain?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Would it be possible to attach a copy of policy CSO3 as workshop by council?
Yes.
Yes, we'll get that done. Thank you very much. Councillors, there's been no further questions. We will actually move on. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 6, which are reports of committees. Sorry, we've already gone through that. We'll come to item 7.2, the responsible officer being Director Warren Bowe, the Director of Canning Corporate and Commercial. It's CC 041 of 21. It's the adjourned item, policy for council members, committee members and candidates. I think it should say complaints policy. Not on mine, it doesn't. It just says adjourned item, and it starts with the word policy. It doesn't on mine. We have the officer's recommendation in front of us. Councillors, any questions on that item? Deputy Mayor?
I don't know if I missed this through you, Mr Mayor. Was there going to be some commentary about how the debate proceeds, given that it was instigated under a previous council, and that certain people who moved the motion, second the motion, are no longer here? And in terms of debate, I don't know if I noticed. I didn't see it.
I think he's referring to the adjourned of substantive motion, which was seconded by Councillor Barry, but I think I can. Did you want to address that yourself? I'll ask governance just to address that. Ms Cornish?
Through you, Mayor. I have spoken to Wowger on this, and at the time, although especially the seconder in this item is no longer an elected member, they were entitled at the time. When we reconvene the item, any new elected member and anybody that hasn't spoken are able to pick up debate. So debate will pick up where we left off, and new elected members are entitled to speak. The fact that we have an item that's seconded by a member that is no longer on council is of no subsequent. We just pick up where we left off. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. CEO? Oh, Director Bowe,
Thank you,
sorry.
Mr Mayor. Deputy Mayor Kunzu, if I could just draw your attention to the comments at paragraph 31. It does reference who has and hasn't spoken at that point.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors, on that item? Any at all? Councillor Sweeney, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just in the policy on attachment 2, I just have a question in regards to the definition on evidence. Under that title, it says that evidence is defined as the available facts or information. I'm just wondering why we have got the word information on there, because information is not evidence. Information is material that hasn't been analysed or examined. And if we're considering making a judgment on evidence, then we should just be making a judgment on facts and not information. Information could mean that we're considering rumours, innuendos and assumptions, and that's something that we shouldn't be. So I'm just wondering, why have we included information in that definition?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The reference to information there pertains to the information that's put forward that warrants the further investigation into the alleged complaint. But I'm happy to take the question on notice and get some further information about the definition and provide that to all elected members prior. Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on that item, councillors? Thank you. We will move on then to CC 047 of 21, proposed road dedication, lot 500, Wharf Street, Queen's Park, and lot 5080, Cecil Avenue, Cannington. The recommendation is on page 37 of this evening's agenda and is also on screen. Are there any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Bain?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Is there any reason why the subject land is being referred to as Wall Street, Queen's Park, when it's in Cannington?
Director Bowe? Is it unequivocally? Director Bride?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm happy to confirm the actual address, but I believe that's the information we've taken off our Intramap system.
We'll double check it and make sure it's correct. We'll get back to you on that, Councillor. Thank you very much. Any further questions on that item, Councillors? Councillor Hardeep Singh.
Through to you, Mayor. A question regarding Lot 500 Wharf Street, which is the parking we are looking to change into the road, Cannington Leisuroplex. The survey has been done that the remaining parking at Leisuroplex is around 75% full even during the peak periods when the Leisuroplex is used. Have we given a thought that given that this whole area is being developed as city centre, in 5 to 10 years' time, if the parking is not enough, because we will be removing some parking if this plan goes ahead, how are we going to provide that extra parking for the Leisuroplex users? What happens?
Future projections on
Thanks,
parking,
Mr Mayor.
Director?
We have considered the future growth projections of the membership of the Leisuroplex. We've also considered the growth in residents within the Canning City Centre. In anticipation of the elevated rail as well, we believe that there'd be parking available on the northern side of what is now the railway line that would also provide access for patrons to the Leisuroplex facility. But yeah, we believe that it's adequately accommodated, notwithstanding the removal of a proportion of the parking for the construction of the road.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Singh?
Just to clarify, we are expecting Leisuroplex users to use parking across the road to come and use the Leisuroplex facilities?
Overflow parking, I think.
That may be available, but ideally we'd be encouraging Leisuroplex visitors and patrons to use other transport modes to access the leisure facility that isn't cars.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Thank you. We will move on then. We'll move on to CC 049 of 21, the report title being Borrowings Required for the Year 2021-22. The officer's recommendation is on page 44 of the agenda and is on screen now. Councillors, are there any questions on that item? Councillor Bain?
Could the city please expand on what the Queen's Park train station development project is?
Director Bride, are you able to pick up on that one?
I'll have to take that on notice. I'm not sure what that involves. I'll get back to council.
Mr Mayor, I may call up Mr Adewale, the manager of
Mr
business.
Adewale, sorry to put you on the spot. Are you able
to
to answer that question? If you're not, that's okay. Are you able to answer the question? The question related to, there's a table on the screen here. It's the second item on the table. The question was, what exactly is that project?
So I think that loan was for purchase of land within Queen's Park area while we are developing the area, but I can get back to you in terms of the actual location or the actual land that was purchased using that loan. Yeah.
We'll get back to you. We'll take the question on notice. Thank you, Councillor Bain. Councillor Bain?
The drawdown of 518,000 plus for the Kent Street Weird precinct plan, has this money been spent?
Director?
I don't believe it's been spent as entirety, Mr Mayor, but it has been committed.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillors. Deputy Mayor?
Just with respect to the in brief and the officer recommendation not being supported, it's just with respect to point 2, the city won't be able to complete this Shelley West SUP. Isn't more the risk that, given that the SUP has actually been completed, that the city will have debt from residents that we wouldn't have funded, and would have to call them in rather than not complete the SUP. I just was wondering why the SUP would not be completed.
Director Bowe.
Yeah, I think that's a pertinent observation from the Deputy Mayor. I'm happy to change the commentary in relation to that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks.
Anything
I just
further?
want to clarify because it's actually quite a big, I mean, we would have all that funding from residents that would need to be called upon if we didn't fund it. So I think that needs to be spelled out. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything further before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CC 05021, late item, recruitment for Chief Executive Officer. We have a number of impartiality. This one's from Director Bowe. Director Bowe, can I get you to read it to the... Yes.
Sorry, have we done the financial report? Yeah?
Yeah, just testing you, Councillor Holland. Well done. I've got here on my run sheet.
I think it's just the way it's been stapled. No, late item's 52.
No, I've got the next item here on my agenda is CC 05021, governance. Am I reading this wrong? No, apparently I've got that right.
And then the financial one's coming up.
The financial report is coming up. Yep. No, I don't think you're right.
Okay.
No, I've got
Mr Mayor, that just picking up from governance, the two late items are simply now being inserted the correct order in their agenda. So 05021 comes before 05221. That's why we're dealing with this item first and then move on to the other one next.
Okay, let's get on with it. It's on the agenda. Councillor Sweeney, did you need to say something?
Oh, look, I just wanted to... What are we dealing with now? That's my only question.
We're dealing with, well, it's very easy, guys. I just read it out. It's CC 050 of 21.
All right.
It's a late item, the title being Recruitment for Chief Executive Officer. The recommendation is on page 3 of the circulated late agenda and is on the screen right now. So I'll get you a moment to catch up to it. Well, I'll ask you to make that declaration. CEO, I'll ask you to make a declaration.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note that 05021 is the late item recruitment for the CEO. As I am currently appointed as the City's interim CEO and have previously made an application for the CEO role, I've declared a financial interest and will leave the chamber.
Thank you. And the CEO is currently leaving the chamber and will take no further part in this item. I have an impartiality disclosure from Director Warren Bowe. It's an impartiality. It says, I've worked with Mr Kane for 11 months, past 5 of those as a direct report to Mr Kane in my role. Whilst he has been the interim CEO, in light of the above and in the interest of transparency, I acknowledge that it could be reasonably perceived that I have an interest in the matter. This interest is not a financial interest. I declare an impartiality interest and I will neither participate in debate on the matter before council or vote. However, I intend to remain in the council chamber during discussion debate to answer any relevant questions and provide advice. Thank you. Councillors, so this is in relation to the late item, the CEO's recruitment for the Chief Executive Officer. Do I have any questions in relation to this item? Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm just confirming that Lester Blades is happy to proceed with the city.
Director.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I met with Mr Blades last week and he has confirmed that he is willing to work with the City and the Council and the selection panel to recruit the CEO.
Yes, Amanda Spencer-Teo. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Would it be made clear to those on the selection panel that if they know a candidate that they would need to complete a declaration? Will that be also in one of the conditions?
Director.
Yes, it will, Mr Mayor. Mr Blades is intimately aware of the previous issues regarding this process and will require all selection panel members to both disclose interests if they exist and declare confidentiality, make confidentiality declarations. Sorry.
I think the local government has now decreed that we should be signing a confidentiality agreement, each person on that committee, and Mr Blade did raise it post this information, and if that happens I think that would be a good thing. Councillor Sweeney?
I do have a question in regards to the continuation of Lester Blades in this process, but I'm unsure whether or not it should be raised now, or whether it should be raised under confidentiality in the next item.
That might be a better place to raise it, I think. I think Lester Blades here because that was the recommendation which was resolved by council at the time, that they would be, because of the disruption, they would be running the process for us. So that's why they're involved at this point. But yes, we'll answer that question in the next item. Any other questions just in relation to this, Councillor Holland?
Yeah, one, we don't have to, I assume we don't have to use Lester Blades if we don't want to, do we?
No, only that it was a...
There's no motion saying that we have to use them.
The motion actually...
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Yes,
I do
Director
believe that the resolution of Council on the 10th of May, Part 5, does identify the utilisation of Lester Blades. If Council is inclined not to use Lester Blades, then I expect, and I'll get advice on this, that part will require revocation to be revisited. But Mr Blades has been already working with myself and a Manager of People and Culture, Keely Haywood, on the understanding that the resolution passed in May would continue, and that Lester Blades, would be engaged to assist the City and the Council recruit the new CEO.
Thank you.
Okay, the other one, on number 1 here, receives the correspondence from the Corruption and Crime Commission. How do we receive the correspondence in We're Open Forum now? How can we receive confidential report in an open forum without making that open? To me, that's a contradiction. I can't see how we can do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. This matter has been raised and consideration given. We sought legal advice as to the ability to convey the correspondence from those agencies to the elected members for full transparency and to ensure that the elected members were fully availed of the agency's responses. The reason why they're confidential attachments is that they are not redistributed publicly. They are confidential and available only to the elected members.
No, I understand that, but under the section 5.123, and I saw the recommendation from McLeod, or the advice from McLeod's, and saying that, which is quite fine, but does that apply to the CCC's result? And I heard what you said before, Mr Mayor. I must admit, I thought the CCC, when they sometimes do disclose their findings, because the CCC is only a recommendation. They can't prosecute, they can't charge, they can't do anything like that. They can only refer their findings to another, a bureau, as it were. So, have we had, in here it's not saying legal advice on the CCC, it's saying legal advice on the Department of Communities, or whatever the local government one is there, but I didn't see it on the CCC's.
Yeah, look, I'm going to ask for the advice of governance here. I think it would be of benefit, considering what Councillor Sweeney was going to ask a moment ago, and then we're all dancing around this at the moment, that we just hold this conversation under confidential and move to confidential matters. I think it should be anyway.
Well, then the whole thing will have to go into confidential matters because of
There's
number 1.
There's no reason for that. Well, I'm not sure what actually happened here, but the question was asked why the order of business tonight has been changed. Councillor Holland, you raised that yourself. We were told that that was because of just the numbering of that. So what we've actually done is we've gone to CC 050 of 21, and that's because that's on my run sheet here provided by governance, so I've gone straight into that. But CC 051 of 21, which we're talking about now, is actually listed under confidential matters tonight. So, Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When the draft agenda briefing was published on the 29th of October, we hadn't had advice in relation, the legal advice at that time. So at that particular time, we considered that both matters would need to be considered as confidential matters behind closed doors. Since receiving the advice and having some internal discussions with governance, we determined that This matter, CC 050, was no longer required to be dealt with behind closed doors. However, CC 051 did require to be dealt with in confidential session because it related to a specific employee of the city. The facts remain that the attachments remain confidential, but if the contents of the attachment need to be discussed to enable council to make the decision, then the recommendation is that the matters are both dealt with behind closed doors.
Can I just caution councillors from the chair in relation to the Crime and Corruption Commission Act, only because I've read it and I know Craig's probably aware of it as well, but if somebody here tonight says something inadvertent about what they have read in this report and says the wrong thing, you have committed a serious offence under the Crime and Corruption Commission Act. So whilst I appreciate and respect the advice provided by administration, I urge caution here, and I would think it would be sensible of us, if we want to continue this discussion and ask relevant questions to help us make a decision, that simply we move this as a confidential matter. I just think to not do that can cause some real dramas for us. Councillor Holland?
First of all, Mr Mayor, yes, and I've got my own brains that I can work out what to say and what not to say. The other thing, yes, if you want to bring it under confidential, I haven't got a problem with that, to discuss the attachments. The third thing about the order of this, I had never had any question about what order this comes in. It didn't worry me that it went before the other one or whatever, and your running sheet's different than one. I don't really care which one it is. We've been explained what happened here, but if we're going to discuss this the way it is now, I can't see how this can be discussed. If what you're saying is true, how this cannot be discussed under confidential matter. And I don't like going under confidential matter at any time. But like you said, if you're saying your words there saying we have to be very careful on what we can say, I still don't see how we can have number one where we receive a report that no one can see. I've got problems. I don't understand how that can happen.
Look, I'm just going to jump in here. I'm just going to move from the chair. Well, can I move a motion at an AB? Councillors, unless there's a good reason for us not to do so, considering the delicate nature of the discussion we're about to have, I would think that this matter would be best left dealt with as a confidential matter. And that being the case, I would ask, unless somebody's got a glaring reason not to, if we want to have a full and frank conversation about this, that we clear the gallery and deal with the matter under confidential. We've already started discussing it, so governance, can we come back to this later on in confidential matters? Can we close the discussion right now and come back to it? Councillors, I'll propose to do that then. What we'll do is we'll end discussion on this item and we'll deal with it at the end of the night under confidential matters, and that way we don't need to clear the gallery. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, that'll be the ruling. We'll come back to this governance later in the evening. I'll then move on to CC 052 of 21, that being the late item monthly financial report, October 2021. Councillors, the recommendation is on page 27 of the circulated late agenda and is also on screen. Are there any questions in relation to the monthly financial report? Councillor Holland?
Just a couple.
Oh, we're just going to bring the CEO back into the room. Councillor Holland, I think you can continue with your question.
These are not over great things, only a couple of little ones. I just wanted to clarify the payment to the Corinthian Park Tennis Club. What was that for just under 50? Also, the Sister Kate, again, was another 10 grand. I thought that was specific speaking last month when it was about 15 grand. It's still going, just so I can get further information on that. The last one is, I see that the temporary staff has come down, Director Bowe. The temporary staff figure has come down. So I've been asking you a couple of times about that, so rather than a question, Mr Mayor, well done that it's come down.
Thank you. So just those two questions about Corinthian Park and Sister Kate's. Yep. Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Corinthian Park Tennis Club would have been payments of the... actually, no, I'll take that on notice, Mr Mayor. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll take those on notice and provide a response to all the elected members under separate cover, Mr Mayor.
Okay, we'll get back to you, take those on notice. Any other questions just in relation to the financial report? Councillor Sweeney first and then the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I've just got one question about reimbursements, and this question is as a result of activating after somebody from the gallery raised a question about reimbursement to a former CEO. And Mr Kane, I think that you said something about this was a previous invoice or a late submission. I just wanted to go back, and I haven't got any notes in front of me because I've only just thought of this one, but wasn't it, Mr Mayor, was it you that brought in a reimbursement policy a couple of months ago about what...
Yeah, it's been adjourned.
Has it? Okay.
Yeah, it's coming back, and that'll just require people to put in, put in those receipts at during a finite period of time, so we don't have this issue.
CEO Corin did submit his receipts before he left.
Oh, I'm being told by the CEO that CEO Corin did actually submit his receipts before he left.
Yeah, last day.
Yeah, on the last day.
Okay, yeah, look, my question was, and it hasn't been, I thought it had been, we voted on, my memory
It's adjourned.
Escapes me, so, okay, that's fine.
It's coming back to council. Thank you.
Thanks.
Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor, with respect to the variances on operating expenditure, it doesn't really clarify. What's the reasoning for such a variance with the employee costs?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With employee costs, there are a number of positions that remain vacant at any particular time across the financial year due to resignation and the time to backfill those. So, and there are a couple of positions that haven't been filled, so it's a combination. But I can provide, I think I have provided some commentary in relation to that to the elected members previously. I can revisit that if you like, Deputy Mayor.
Any further questions before we move on to the next item? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CC 053 of 21. That's also a late item. Budget review as at 31st of October 2021. The recommendation is on page 63 of the circulated late agenda and is also now on screen. Any questions in relation to Councillor Spencer-Teo?
Just with, I'm not going to say the page because it's probably out of numbered, out of sequence anyway, but with the capital expenditure item G Part 2, which is the Burrendar Park Southern Change Rooms, 153,000, is that part of the 450k that they were allocated previously?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, that is in addition to the allocation that was made in the budget when it was adopted. Obviously, the quantity surveyor we've engaged a quantity surveyor since the budget was endorsed, and the cost of that refurbishment and upgrade to that building has significantly increased. As a result, we need more money to complete the project.
Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Does that include, or does that address the flooding issues that the club has?
Director.
I'm advised that it does, yes, Mr Mayor.
So that 600, let's say 600k all up, that is the cosmetic, from what I understand, the cosmetic upgrades to the change room and their canteen facilities, is that correct? And the flooding?
Yes, that's correct, Mr Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions here, councillors? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Paragraph 11, A, Section 3, $75,000 for the maintenance, predominantly cleaning for 6 months of the Hillview Intercultural Centre. Can you please explain that number, 75,000 for 6 months?
Director Bowe.
Yeah, that's in relation to cleaning and maintenance, Councillor Bain. The facility will need to be cleaned on a daily basis, and we hadn't included that in the original budget back in May, June.
Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Sorry, the questions are flowing. I remember with the Coker Park change room upgrades, we were able to apply for some grant funding. Has that been the case with the Burrendar change rooms?
Director
Or
Bowe.
are we funding that?
Director Bowe.
No, we haven't made any application for the Burrendar Park Southern change rooms. Applying for grant funding at this stage would further delay the project, and we already have a couple of other change room upgrade projects that are ahead of the priority for Burrendar South.
And one more question, is there any financial contribution from any of the clubs that use those facilities?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't believe so, no.
Director Bowe, can I just ask a question based on what Councillor Bain just asked? Just considering the cleaning costs across the organisation, with the state government talking about reopening borders in some stage, I think in early to mid-February, are we projecting, as far as budget reviews go, to having a need to increase our cleaning regime? Is that something that we will need to project?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the reality is that we have already increased our allocation for cleaning across a number of our facilities, across our leisureplexes. We increased the level of service to our public toilets and other facilities during the initial COVID in 2020. But this additional allocation here covers, in effect, we didn't include it in the budget when it was endorsed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the budget review? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next item. We've already dealt with CD 033 of 21. That has been dealt with. We'll move on to EN 026 of 21. The responsible officer being Mrs Anita Imprimo to my left, the Acting Director of Canning Environment. The title report is Energy Sustainability and Renewable Project Walga Power Purchase Agreement. The recommendation is on page 81 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Also going to call on Melanie Bainbridge. Melanie, I can see you at the back there. Just before we start, I might get you to come forward. I'm going to call on Melanie Bainbridge, a member of the City staff, to present a short presentation, and then I'll ask councillors if they have any questions. Ms Bainbridge, thank you for coming along this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, councillors. Good evening. I was unaware that I was presenting tonight, so I'm sorry about this, but please, if you wouldn't mind moving that on for me. Does that move that on? Beautiful. Wonderful. Okay. The Walga Power Purchase Agreement, or what is being called a Power Purchase Agreement, is actually a precursor to a larger energy spend across the sector. So the intention of the work that's being done by Walga at the moment is to aggregate the energy across the Southwest Interconnected System and all the councils that sit within that, and give us the option of going to 100% renewables within 3 years. There are currently 51 councils of the 53 on the Swiss participating in the project, so it is probably the largest energy project that I think local governments in the Southern Hemisphere potentially have entered into as a collective bargaining agreement around energy. So it's part of a larger project or a larger program of renewables works that Walga is working with the sector on. That includes working with local governments on how we can manage our energy better within our own sort of council areas, particularly around load shifting and optimisation, and working with local governments particularly on their carbon management and energy management and offsetting programs. So the reason for this is, or the reason for it being a 3-year PPA rather than a normal sized PPA, if you like, so they're usually roughly 10 years as a contract. The reason for it only being 3 years is that local government is a relatively small piece of the energy market for a gentailer or for an energy generator. And the only way we can secure renewable energy load in the system is by coming together. We need to prove to the energy market that we are actually capable of working together as a group of local governments across Western Australia. So the project as a whole will save local governments around $5 million per annum on energy costs, not incorporating carbon offset costs, which we will probably be looking at within the next 3 to 5 years. So this is also the largest emissions reduction that local governments, we think, in the Southern Hemisphere has enacted. So it's a fairly significant project. It will meet national, state and local government emissions reductions targets. At this point in time, you'll know from COP26 that Nationally, we've made a 2050 emissions target of net zero. The state also has a slightly wishy-washy emissions target of net zero by 2050, and I only say wishy-washy because it hasn't been enacted yet. But most local governments are actually looking to a 2030 target, not a 2050 one, because most local governments are actually acting on the scientific advice rather than the political advice. So we need to ensure security of that renewable supply, and particularly in the context of LGCs. So LGCs at the moment, because there's been, I guess, a political shift, we're actually moving in a very fast upward trajectory in terms of the costs of LGCs, or the renewable energy certificates. They're going skyward, and what's potentially going to happen to local government as other big players come into the market, will lose the opportunity to buy those LGCs at a reasonable cost. So we're going to try through this project to mitigate the impacts of future energy, LGC, and our carbon reduction costs. So obviously there are those alignments with the federal and state commitments, and there is, we had hoped from COP26 there would probably be an agreement around 2030 targets based on science-derived targets rather than politically charged targets. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we haven't seen that, so we're still working to those 2050 national targets. Local government targets increasingly, as I mentioned, 2030 net zero for corporate operations, and many of them are looking to 100% renewable energy for corporate energy also, with a lot of them looking to 2045 for community emissions targets as well, which is, you know, even in advance of the national and international targets set. We're also looking to align with the city's upcoming climate change and energy transformation strategy, which is under development at the moment, and the existing sustainability policy. So what this means for the City of Canning at this point in time is that we've been, Synergy has been appointed, the contract for the Walga PPA. We've been offered two options by the provider, a bundled and an unbundled tariff offer. Walga is recommending that local governments opt for that unbundled option because it gives us space to negotiate around non-commodity costs. Canning can opt for a number of different options to participate in the contract on both the bundled and the unbundled tariffs, and these include going 100% renewables from day one, so sign the contract and we offset our entire energy emissions. A phased approach to entry of 50 to 75 to 100% to reach 100% by year 3, or a phased approach from 25% at entry. 25% at entry is the minimum that we can actually enter into this contract with, and we do need to get to 100% by the end of that 3-year period in order to be part of the ongoing negotiations for a longer term PPA with Walga. So there are some risks of accepting the offer. The cost risk is that 100% renewables from day one is an annual increase in total contract cost on what we're currently paying. The recommended option that we're looking at the moment, which you'll have seen in the report, is a phased-in approach of 50 to 100% over the 3 years, which will achieve that 100% by year 3. The phased approach will cost us approximately over the term of the contract $168,000, a little bit plus, and that averages to an increased cost on energy of around about $56,000 per year, stepped up over those 3-year periods. The total cost of contract over 3 years for metered contestable supply is 4.2 mil currently. So by comparison, the renewables is, the 100% renewables is slightly higher. It's roughly $98,500 per year if we wanted to opt in 100% renewables from day one. So what we've done is done a bit of a calculation based on our contract as it stands, plus 3% CPI, which is around about the annual increase that most of the big energy retailers are applying at the moment, with the expectation that We come out of contract in April 2022. No matter what happens, whether we enter into this contract with Walga or whether we have to go out to the market for a new contract, we're still going to be up for the increasing energy prices, but we won't have access to the renewables. And likelihood is that because the renewables will now be sitting in the Walga PPA, we wouldn't have access to those at a decent cost at any point in the near future. Risk of not accepting the offer that we won't be able to participate in that future 10-year PPA. This is not because Walga's saying we can't, it's actually because the energy suppliers need to secure basically a lump of renewables in order to fix the energy and LGC prices for that very significant contract period. So they need surety, basically. Having to absorb energy and emissions costs for us over the next 13 years, so if you think about this 3-year PPE plus 10, will mean that we're going to be absorbing pretty much significantly higher contract costs later, and that is likely to impact on our future LTFP planning, because we cannot predict what energy prices will do over the next 10 years unless we fix them in a contract like this one. So there are obviously those rapid cost increases in the LGCs, or the renewable energy certificates. They're the rapid carbon cost increases also, which will mean if at a later date we actually do want to go 100% renewables, or we do want to go 100% emissions offset, we'll be paying more for that in the longer term. And potentially there are some reputational risks, of which I'm sure are obvious to you, of not entering in. Potentially, because there are already 51 of 53 local governments on the Swiss participating in this project, we would be a bit of a sore thumb not participating. We'd be also seen as a bit of a laggard government in the sustainability and climate emissions space. And we think there would potentially also be some media attention to come out of that. So that's pretty much that. Shall I stay for questions?
All finished? Thank you. I'll just remind councillors too, please, if we have mobile phones on our desk, can we please put them away? We're asking members of the public to not use their phones, and we need to be doing the same. Any questions in relation to that item from Ms Bainbridge while she's actually here? Jessie Jacobs, Councillor Jacobs.
How would you like them? I've got a fair few, so I do two.
No,
and
just
then...
run through them one by one. Just give Ms Bainbridge an opportunity to answer them.
So if we get this set up, is this power generated somewhere else and we just feed off the grid? So it's in and out? So
Yes.
Yeah.
So the power that will be aggregated through this process is from 3 wind farms, so Synergy's wind farms, Emu Downs, Colga, and there is another one. So yeah, we'll be taking from those 3. We'll be obviously pulling from the grid as it exists, but using the energy LGCs that come out of those 3 wind farms. The PPA conversation is around potentially actually building a wind farm specifically for local government, so that it secures that energy supply into the future carbon neutrally.
Thank you.
And feeding on from that, because the power is generated there and we're here, there's maybe a few hundred kilometres, are we calculating in the energy loss? Are we calculating in the grid cost? That?
Synergy does, so those are some of those non-commodity costs that we sort of, when we go to the unbundled tariff, if we choose that option, that we have power to negotiate around. But yes, Synergy does factor that into the Gen Taylor losses.
A Welga or a private company, so we're interfacing with Welga, but behind Welga, is there a private company that's, facilitating this and taking a cut?
Well, no, but Walga does. So to be very transparent, Walga has negotiated this contract, and I have to give massive props to the young gentleman who was brought on to do that on their behalf, because he's been spectacular in this space. I don't think there's anyone over the last 10 years that could have done a better job of this, of actually bringing 51 local governments together in a power purchase agreement.
I'll just ask you, just keep the questions, the answers just as brief as you can. No need to go into details about the young fellow that ran the... Thank you, yep.
Sure. The negotiation is under Walga's preferred supplier agreement, so it sits under the same sort of agreement that we would work through our general procurement processes, which they do take a cut of. It's a small percentage, and I think it's 2%.
So Walga's taking a 2% cut. And is that reinvested into Walga?
Yes.
Okay. you said 3 to 5 years carbon offset cost would be. Now, it got me interested. What would be that cost potentially in 3 to 5 years, that carbon cost, offset cost?
I would have to go into the report. The carbon offset cost, as in what would we be paying within the next 3 years? So we're paying roughly $19 per tonne now. That's increased, I think it was $18.50 around about 6 months ago. So that's kind of the trajectory that it started moving on. So if we extrapolate out, which, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you exactly how much carbon costs will be within the next 3 to 5 years, but what I can tell you is that currently, apologies, I'm trying to find the figures in the report because they are in there.
I want to notice if you like. I just keep.
I will get it back to you.
Perhaps come back to us with an answer to that one. Thank you.
I don't want to put you on the spot or anything. You said the political advice. What is the political advice? You told me the scientific advice, but then you said that there was a recent development in political update and political advice. What is the political advice?
So I guess when I say that, I mean the current carbon targets, the current energy targets of net zero by 2050, which are the international targets which the Prime Minister has signed up to through COP26. They're also similar to the targets that the state government has signed up to through its climate policy. So they would be considered the political targets because effectively what the IPCC is telling us, the International Panel for Climate Change is telling us, is that science-derived targets tell us that we need to be moving to a 2030 trajectory, not a 2050 trajectory. So there is a disparity between the political commitments we're making and the science-derived targets we need to be setting.
Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just got a few more, won't be too long. Is it possible that we could invest in technology directly, e.g. solar panel, battery? I just see a bit of a benefit to having it with us right here because if the grid goes down, you don't have access to that energy. If it's, I think with, power walls and everything, it's, you've got AI running it. Is it possible to spend the same amount of money to have a system, that we have our own system apart from just using their system?
Understand what you're saying. Yes and no. It is possible and it is something that we would look to invest in through the Climate Change and Energy Transformation Strategy, which would be our energy optimisation plan. So it would be looking at the energy used across the city on all our facilities and all our assets and managing that energy in the best way possible. Now that will reduce our energy spend, but it won't negate it. What will happen in the context of this PPA is that everything we invest in city-owned renewables or in city-owned energy efficiency projects will reduce our energy spend against the contract.
Mr Mayor, last one. Thank you for this. You mentioned LGCs. If we did go to 100% straight away and we got as many certificates as we possibly get, are those, forgive me, I'm not so on this, detailed on this, but is that an investment? Are those certificates technically an investment and you hold them and get returns later?
Not really. We can't on-sell them, unfortunately. I mean, they can be, and it kind of depends how you've generated them. But unfortunately, in this case, it's not us generating the certificates, it's the gentailer. So they would retire those certificates in order to make us carbon neutral.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Singh.
Mr Mayor, just to confirm, the report says this initiative will create 5 million savings for the local government sector. However, it will cost an extra $168,895, basically $168,000 for City of Canning over the 3-year period. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. So across the sector, unfortunately, some of the larger local governments are going to take a hit for this, whereas the smaller local governments are potentially going to benefit from this. The reason, of course, is the volume of energy that we actually use.
So, follow-up question.
Yes.
So, given that the larger local governments are key to secure this proposal, PPA, has a, let's say, negotiation taken place to offer something better for the larger cities? For example, if City of Canning does not go ahead with this PPA, this whole thing will fall, and there will be no $5 million savings for the local government sector. And we are asking City of Canning to pay an extra amount of money, $168,000 over 3 years, to create savings for other small local governments. So there is no benefit for us, which Synergy is offering.
Yeah, I would disagree. I would say the great benefit with us is that we don't have to pay any carbon offsets costs. So at some point in time, and potentially, you know, if we see a change of government within the next year, which we may well do, we'll be looking at carbon disclosure project. We'll be looking at potentially paying for our offsets. With this project, we will never have to do that because we'll have already offset our energy costs. So the flip side of that is that there is a significant saving in carbon costs. But for us, I think that kind of, I guess that kind of negotiation, trying to negotiate a better deal for larger local governments who use significantly more money, would actually potentially look a little bit politically unpalatable, I suspect. The smaller local governments, the regional local governments, already struggle with their own sustainability. So I don't think that a small over cost for the privilege of having 100% renewables would be seen as a really significant sort of risk to larger local governments. What we've seen is that there are local governments who are participating in this, who are in a relatively dire financial situation, who are going 100% renewables from day one because they can see the longer term benefit of locking in these costs now.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Sorry, a few questions, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure who to address this question to. Are we paying any carbon offset cost as of today, City of Canning?
We currently do not.
And the expectation is with the change of federal government, we might have to pay. Is that what this is based on?
Quite likely, highly likely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland. Just turn, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I can't see how anyone's got a crystal ball saying what government's going to do next year or the year after. That's not in their manifesto at the moment about carbon things. So I think that is irrelevant, should not be used in here. The 168,000, I'd like to know, that's just going to be a cost to the City of Canning to get what? We're going to, is it a, we'll keep this into question, Simon. Is that effectively all we're doing is subsidising smaller local councils and we're paying for it?
No, not at all. We're purchasing renewable energy.
But we are at a cost of $168,000 per year.
Look, the large-scale renewable energy certificates do cost. What Walga's been able to secure through this PPA is a significant reduction in the cost of those LGCs. What is, I guess, an overcost for us is the volume of energy that we consume and the fact that we need to optimise our energy use.
The question was, are we going to be paying $168,000 more to effectively get nothing? And as you just said before, it is to cross-subsidise smaller councils.
There's no subsidisation of smaller councils.
No, I'll just get the CEO to comment on that question from Councillor Holland.
Nice.
Thank you. Look, these are good questions because the total premium for us for any 1 year is $50,000 on $5.9 million worth of electricity purchase. So $56,000 on $5.9 million of electricity purchase. So we have to look at a couple of things. Firstly, as the agreement stands to date, it's virtually fully subscribed. If Canning didn't want to get involved in this, it will make no difference to the agreement going ahead. So picking up Councillor Singh's point, right now we look potentially at being excluded if we are able to make a commitment. If in the next 3 years then we wanted to say under our plan we want to go to renewable energy, it will cost us a lot more to try and source an independent sole source supply. The way we've structured the unbundled agreement gives us the flexibility to be able to reduce our energy load through other initiatives. And it'd be my expectation from the work that Melanie's doing that during the course of 3 years we may well actually come back to a position better than we are currently paying. Look, the other item we brought to you recently about the LED light conversion was exactly that. how we could invest in a network in order to reduce our energy costs, improve safety and an environmental position. So the net position of 50,000 is virtually negligible as a rounding error on the city's current electricity spend. If we miss this opportunity, we won't get a chance to get back in.
With all due respect,
Councillor
whether we miss this opportunity is not, that is up for council to decide. Reputational damage or reputational risk, I don't think is applicable. I don't agree with that. The actual thing, the question will be, is we do not have to go into something just because everybody else is going into it. We did that once with the SMRC, and look where that got us. The other part is, you brought this up, so I can go on to this about the political thing and what was the Prime Minister said about 2050. He also said we would be using future technologies that he didn't disclose. So why can't we
I'll just have to ask you to make a,
so why can't
making
we
statements and
use
debating.
future technologies as well? You're saying that the only technology we've got here is wind farms. It might not be the future technology in 3 years' time.
CEO.
And the last question being at
I'll
the
just get the
moment...
CEO to deal with that question.
Sorry, why wasn't this brought to a SIB? Or was it, or did I miss something?
CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There will be new technology change over a period of time, and the city will continue to take those initiatives to look to acquire it. I know when the city put on its original solar panels, they were probably 180 kilowatt panels, and now the newest panels you can get on the market are 440 kilowatt. But we will never get anything at scale to allow us to buy 100% renewable energy. We won't have the capacity to build our own wind farm or our giant solar farms. We're just not a scale producer of energy. So in terms of this position, trying to do something which is unique, this needed ACCC approval. Because the normal outcome is that you can't collude as a group to acquire a service. So the ACCC have looked at this and said it's of such significance they have given the approval for all local governments to be involved. In the entire southwest, there are only 2 local governments that aren't participating. One small local government who can't find their energy bill, they don't know how much they pay, and the city of Bunbury, which said, I think we should go it alone. Every other local government has signed up to it, including the regional local governments. Now, in terms of where this will go, that's up to obviously a council position. But from a risk perspective, the reason we put the risk table in the position is, the nation needs to go 2050 and net zero. How are we going to get to net zero if we don't get involved in large-scale projects like this? And in terms of SIB, we only had the final process for the end of the Walga contract 3 weeks ago. So this was initiated in CEO Kyron's time. He was part of the original group that is involved with this. There's been a collective power purchase agreement. A lot of local governments are dealing with this under delegation and simply making the decision. I believe this needed to be dealt transparently and bring it to council.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Holland?
The 100, yes, but this is not in the long-term financial plan or in the budget, is it?
CEO.
So you note that the start date is April 2022, so this has no financial impact on the city's budget this year, and the allocation is in the draft new long-term financial plan, which will be discussed with council on Thursday. However, noting that a net cost of 50-odd thousand per annum on $5.9 million worth of annual electricity expenditure, it is a negligible expenditure. It wouldn't even sit as a rounding item in the LTFP.
Thank you. Any further questions? Deputy Mayor? And I'll come to Councillor Sweeney.
Sorry, can I just clarify? With respect to the proposal and the 100% renewable, we say we're getting the electricity from the wind farms, Albany, Colgar and Emu Downs, but obviously they're not working all the time. So we get it from we actually get the electricity from the coal-fired power stations as part of Swiss, and then say that we're getting it from the 3 wind farms and use Australian carbon credits, and say that we're using renewable energy, but we're relying on the normal grid. Is that correct?
CEO, are you able to answer?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we draw the energy from the grid, but it's what goes into the grid as a collective, which is assessed. So in terms of coal-fired power, the 2 Muja stations start to deactivate in 2022 and 2025. So as of those dates, which is the end of this PPA, coal will represent a negligible contribution in terms of the operation of the grid. there will be additional renewable energy that will come in. But you have large firms now, mining companies, the two major supermarkets, Coles and Woolworths, all said they've gone 100% renewable by 2025. The point is, if we decide we actually want to be in this market, there mightn't be any renewable energy for us to source. The advantage of the PPA is it gives us the ability to get in at virtually nil cost now, and allows us then as a collective to be locked into a longer term agreement in 3 years' time.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney.
Yes, thank you, because I think that the question really is how far do we jump in to this federal government initiative? And I don't know how we can even possibly, as a council, come to some sort of determination unless we have something like a SIB. And I think that's where this is at the moment. I think if we try and make a decision on this without having a SIB and getting a lot more information so that councillors are better informed.
That would be a decision, though. So when it comes to council next Tuesday, you could adjourn the item for the purpose of holding it over for a SIB. Is there a time imperative on this? Yes. There is. CEO, I'll just ask I know what you're saying, Craig. I'll just ask the CEO to...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And knowing that we have only just received the final pricing list, we could arrange for a SIB this week, tomorrow night if you'd like. But the end date is the 18th. 18th of November if we're not committed at that stage. And we won't be able to join in. So this is not, unfortunately, a matter that we could delay for another month. We've got, whatever today's date is, 9 days before the tender will close. It's unfortunate that we've got such a limited time, but that's the nature of the way that it's been structured through Walgo.
If I may jump in to, most energy contracts don't come through council. This is coming to council for visibility, but in general, our energy contracting and procurement processes wouldn't come to council for approval through this process.
Councillor Holland, I've got no problem with that. In fact, standing orders don't apply to these meetings, as you obviously would know. So if Ms Bainbridge has been asked to stand here and answer questions and she's able to provide some advice that'll help us work through a really something that we obviously are having difficulty dealing with, I've got no issue. So I'd just allow you to just hold on just 1 second. The CEO has just mentioned in relation to what Councillor Sweeney said, Director Bowe is saying that if we're okay with it, this Thursday we've got a workshop this Thursday night, and we can tag this item onto the workshop on Thursday evening. If councillors are happy to spend next half an hour here discussing the matter, at least we can touch on it at that meeting. Craig, you okay with that?
Well, Mr Mayor, this has sort of been thrown on us at the last moment. I don't know what the diary appointments are of the other councillors to see what they've got on in 2 days. I'll have to check mine as well, but
the workshop's already in the diary. We're already going to be here. The workshop's already in the diary.
Oh, for this week?
For this week. Thursday this week, we already have a workshop.
Okay, all right then.
We're just going to add it to it.
Okay, well, I'm fine with that. I just think we do need to have another session, a SIB on this.
That'll be we'll do that on Thursday, definitely. All right, done. Councillor Singh.
Last question, Mr Mayor, to the CEO. The report says the current contract for energy supply with Perth Energy is due to expire in April 2022. If we do not accept this offer, highly likely we will be putting tender out for our energy supply. The report implies the cost of energy will highly likely go up. Have we done any study or do we have any facts which suggest this? Because I believe energy market, it goes up and down all the time. Can it go down as well?
I'll just let the CEO answer that. CEO?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the April 2022 is the end. If the council didn't decide to procure this arrangement, we'd have to go for an independent tender. We'd start that process obviously as quickly as possible. The issue for us is whether we actually get it completed in time. Interesting to note that we've accepted through Synergy the least cost option for us, which means all the other renewable energy options were presented were more expensive. So if council decided it wants renewable energy on the open market, it will certainly cost us more than we're dealing with now. And we know, just as I said, in terms of the end date for coal-fired power, that both the Muja stations are due to shut down. So what's going to be left in the market is going to be sourced from some gas, but there are no new gas-fired power stations being planned in WA, and renewables. We can only simply look at that advice and say it's likely that power prices will go up rather than go down.
Councillor Singh.
Follow-up question. The question is basically, is there a chance to source cheaper energy? Doesn't matter it's renewable or non-renewable, or is it from gas or hydrogen, but is there a chance that we will be able to secure cheaper energy once our contract expires in 2022? Has any study been done on that?
CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The only cheaper source at the moment is coal, and coal at the moment has a dip for the next 2 years, and then coal will cease. So the question is, it says if you're looking for a long-term agreement, as we've did with Perth Energy now, we know that coal is exiting the market. So the piece for us is about trying to achieve some price stability for the longer term. Noting that this has fixed price escalation over the next 3 years, we would know very predictably what the energy costs are going to be for the city through this arrangement. So if I can't give you any more advice or certainty of that. We have an uncertain market if we go back out to do something alone. We have a certain market if we stick to the PPA.
We might just move on, only because we're now going to hold a workshop on Thursday and deal with it at that stage. So being only Tuesday evening, if councillors have got questions they would really like specifically asked at that workshop on Thursday, please send them through to the responsible officer or to the CEO, but that's Anita Amprimo here. Send them through to her and we'll get those answered at that workshop, or at least have that information distributed to all the councillors before that session occurs. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to item 7.5, the responsible officer being Dr Sarah McQuaid, the Director of Canning Community. It's CO 008 of 21, Youth Engagement. The recommendation is on page 102 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Thank you, Governance. Any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Just with item 16, where it says that you're arranging meetings with school representatives, are they head of learning areas or principals that we're approaching?
Director McQuaid.
I'll actually ask Sarah Janali, Manager of Community and Culture, to take that question, please.
Sarah Janali.
Thank you. We've been approaching the principals at the outset and then providing the scope around the notice of motion and the intent to work with the school around civic engagement. And then we have had engagement with Ross Moyne, for example, with the head of humanities there. But we've experienced some challenges in engaging with some of the schools and getting responses to our emails. So in some cases it's been student services, and then once we meet with the relevant officer that's responded to the correspondence, they're able to bring in the other relevant people within the school that are able to assist. Yeah, so essentially going with whoever we can actually access at the moment, but in the case of Ross Moyne, we did have the head of learning for the humanities at the meeting.
Thank you. Any further questions on that item? Councillor Holland, yes.
This is just a general one, and as far as a conflict or declaring an interest, you were saying that we might deal with hollers, and you have at Ross Moyne. Do I have to declare anything considering my wife's a holler at Willerton, and it's probably not the main area that you're talking about? Should I be here?
Director McQuaid, well, you certainly would be to impartiality at the very... Dr McQuaid.
My initial sense would be no, because there's no financial interest and no financial gain to be had, if anything, an impartiality for noting for the record. But I believe everything's been fairly well documented as above board, and I don't believe we've had direct relations in relation to this matter with your wife.
Potentially you could though, so I might do an impartiality one, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, it'd be an impartiality. Yep, absolutely. Any further... Yes,
sorry, Mr Mayor, I mean, should I declare that now? Because this is an AB.
Well, you can. I mean, this is being recorded. You've mentioned that your wife works at the school, and I think you're saying that you will for the OCM.
I'll declare an impartiality interest.
So with the impartiality, you should declare it before the matter's introduced, and you've already covered it. I've got no issue with that. We'll get that filled out before the next meeting. Thank you, and just for the record, Councillor Holland is filling out that impartiality, the declaration right now.
Just on that, isn't this just to receive a report? I mean, it's not really even making a decision. In that case, should I also declare one because my son attends Ross Moyne and he does humanities? Yeah. Are we opening a can of worms here?
Director Director?
I think we probably, as it is just a report, and the youth engagement framework that we will present back to council later will just be a framework for how we approach engagement. I would imagine that nearly every elected member in this room
Has some link
has
to...
someone or has some relation. Yeah. I think in the case of Councillor Holland, obviously there's a direct involvement that we could have a meeting that could result in action.
Because his wife's an employee, but your child is just a student at the school. Can't see any issue. But Councillor Holland?
Mr Mayor, the Minister did make a decree on things like this, like if your son is a member of a cricket club and you're a member of the cricket club, you're not conflicted at all or you're a member of the bridge club or a member of whatever. There has been actually a decision made.
They made a specific declaration in relation to memberships of clubs, and we've had issues here before where people have been saying it's a financial interest to be a member of a club. It's not a financial interest to be a member of a club, and you don't need to leave the room. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Anyone else? Any further questions on that matter? But if anyone ever has an issue in relation to impartiality, always err on the side of caution and fill out the form if you'd like to. It's probably very good practice. Any further questions? Thank you. We'll move on then if that's the case. We've dealt with youth engagement. The next item we have dealt with, which was in relation to the Southern Link Road, that's been dealt with. We have dealt with NOM 01121 in relation to CSO3. From the best of my recollection, I think we're now up to urgent business. There are none. That's at item 9, and we will then move to confidential matters, and they are at item 10. Council will now consider those confidential matters, which will be the matter earlier raised, CC 050 of 21, recruitment for the Chief Executive Officer, and also CC 051 of 21, the Interim Chief Executive Officer arrangements. I'd like to thank members of the public for their attendance tonight and ask that they please leave the chamber in order for Council to consider those two confidential matters. Thank you. Ms Hayward, thank you very much for staying around this evening. We very much appreciate it. Councillors, there being no further business, I now declare the agenda briefing closed. The time now is 8:23 p.m, 8:23. Thank you very much to all concerned. Thank you, governance.